Here's the translation of the provided text into natural-sounding, grammatically correct English, while preserving the original sentiment and tone. Despite China pouring billions of dollars into establishing a vast drug manufacturing network in Venezuela, they couldn't serve their domestic market and instead aimed directly at the United States. What was their objective? To poison Americans and shatter the nation's inner strength. However, one leader stood up against this insidious plan. A president declared that the United States would never bow down. He ordered the destruction of all drug facilities stretching from the Caribbean to Africa and South America that were supported by the North. Furthermore, as China's immense revenue streams began to crumble, the puppet masters forced Venezuela to take responsibility, triggering a chain of events that sent shockwaves across the globe. Was it simply due to the massive profits, or did China intend to use drugs as a weapon? Welcome to Military 247, the truth that has been concealed until today. Drugs are not merely a criminal issue. They have evolved into a strategic and political tool. For years, U.S. intelligence has consistently detected enormous sums of money flowing from Beijing to global drug production zones. Chemical companies in China have become the primary suppliers of fentanyl and other narcotics. By investing billions into the production chain, China is stealthily weaponizing drugs into a soft chemical warfare aimed squarely at American society. Why was the immediate question? Why do they continue to choose drugs? Because it doesn't require an army or nuclear weapons to dismantle a nation's foundation. With hundreds of thousands of young Americans falling into a vortex of addiction, social trust erodes, the workforce dwindles, and citizens lack the health to serve in the military. This is the silent war China wants to wage. However, the United States is not easily defeated. From the outset of his term, Donald Trump declared that the U.S. would defend its borders and national security against all malevolent plots. He chose the war on transnational drugs as his first battleground. Special operations were launched. The DEA, in coordination with the CIA and supported by the Navy and the U.S. military, spearheaded the effort. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers patrolled the Caribbean, considered a gateway for drugs to reach the U.S. Virginia-class submarines silently gathered intelligence on the undersea situation, monitoring all routes from South America to Asia. MQ-9 UAVs hovered in the sky day and night, meticulously documenting suspicious shipments and tiny airstrips used by drug cartels in the jungle. It can be said that this marked the first time in history that a military-led operation was fully utilized in the war on drugs. Dozens of precursor chemical depots were destroyed. Chinese engineers had constructed several underground laboratories in South America. U.S. Special Forces carried out raids. These once brightly lit factory buildings now exist only in satellite imagery. This meant China's revenue would be slashed by tens of billions of dollars within months. It's important to note that Beijing had viewed this operation as an underground financial channel to support sectors affected by sanctions. Indeed, with that money gone and China facing a dilemma, would they dare publicly admit their involvement in drug production? Absolutely not. Instead, they chose a different path, using Venezuela as a pawn. Venezuela, long dependent on both Russia and China, relied on their support for everything from weapons and ammunition to even advanced air defense systems. Both Moscow and Beijing supplied them with radar. Crucially, Venezuelan leaders understood that if they couldn't demonstrate goodwill towards these powers, the support would cease. Thus, Caracas was ready as soon as China gave the signal. They began conducting more missile tests. Satellite photos released by the Pentagon showed numerous new launchers erected along the Caribbean coast. Venezuela was clearly being encouraged to prepare for an attack. This attack was not aimed at Colombia or other nations. It was directed squarely at the U.S. warships patrolling the Caribbean. The question arises, why attack the U.S.? The answer is they wanted to convey that if the U.S. dared to disrupt China's profits, they would face consequences right in their own backyard. While a bold calculation, it was also a carefully considered one. Donald Trump was not one to be threatened. As soon as U.S. intelligence detected the signs, he consistently warned that any attack on U.S. warships would be considered an act of war. Yet, Venezuela disregarded this. They believed the U.S. would hesitate due to China's influence. They didn't realize this paved the way for a devastating storm about to descend upon Caracas. In the final days of summer, as the U.S. Navy conducted a routine exercise in the southern Caribbean, Venezuelan forces unexpectedly opened fire. Hundreds of anti-ship missiles streaked through the night. Red alerts immediately blazed on U.S. warships' early warning radar. Crews scrambled to battle stations. The Aegis system came alive. SM-6 missiles roared through the night. The Phalanx CIWS spun its barrels, unleashing thousands of rounds in seconds, creating arcs of fire in the sky. All Venezuelan missiles fell into the Caribbean Sea, with only a few managing to cause minor fires, but no U.S. sailors were harmed. Videos of the event, disseminated that very night, captured global attention. Once again, Venezuela dared to confront the U.S. Donald Trump appeared on television almost immediately. His message was brief and decisive. Venezuela had crossed the red line. The U.S. would retaliate. And when the U.S. military unleashed its power, his declaration served as a bridge to the next phase. Let's consider the bigger picture. The Venezuelan missiles were merely a component of the soft weapon, the drugs, wielded by Beijing. Beijing's machinations were the root cause. Their plan to poison Americans had failed, and now they sought a more dangerous game, using Venezuela as a proxy. We are all left with the question, if these schemes go unchecked, where will the world be headed? Will any nation be capable of resisting? The answer is clear. One of the few nations possessing superior military technology and an unshakable resolve is the United States. Only Donald Trump's leadership could maintain the necessary strength. The tranquil night of the Caribbean islands was suddenly torn apart by streaks of light emanating from the Venezuelan coast. Dozens of anti-ship missiles were launched, their launch screaming through the atmosphere. The sky turned black, forming a horrifying curtain of fire aimed at the searching U.S. warships. This was no mere test. It was a pre-scripted surprise attack, driven by underlying factors. Venezuela, a nation economically devastated, relies heavily on military support from Russia and China. Could they have initiated this alone, or was this merely an indirect action by Beijing and Moscow to test Washington? This question held the entire world in suspense. On the surface of the Caribbean Sea, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer squadron was in a simulated drill with supporting warships. The SPY-1D radar of the USS Porter suddenly vibrated. Warning bells chimed. The entire combat system was activated within seconds. The space around the ships instantly became a storm of metal. Vertical launch system, VLS tubes opened. SM-6 interceptor missiles shot out, leaving fiery blue trails in the sky. Nearby, the Phalanx close-in weapon system, CIWS, rapidly spun its barrels, firing thousands of rounds per minute in seconds, creating interlocking arcs of fire like a mobile steel wall to block incoming missiles. Explosions reverberated across the sea. All Venezuelan shells were intercepted, blossoming into fiery spheres that fell into the dark Caribbean waters. One was cut in half. Shrapnel rained down like metal. Some projectiles breached the outer layers, but the Navy's Iron Dome and ram systems eliminated them within a few hundred meters. As a result, only a few fragments struck the ship's deck, causing scorch marks but no casualties. It's noteworthy that this was not an unexpected action. U.S. intelligence had long warned of Venezuela deploying YJ-83 cruise missiles, a weapon supplied by China to its coast. New base facilities had been constructed, with foreign engineers present. There was also substantial information suggesting Russian advisors were in Caracas, guiding the use of coastal defense systems. Therefore, when the volley of missiles was launched, the world realized this was an attack orchestrated by Russia and China. But why this timing? Earlier, numerous U.S. Special Operations Forces had uncovered drug production facilities secretly funded by Beijing. China could not stand idly by as its multi-billion-dollar revenue stream was cut off. To send a message, they needed a counterattack, and Venezuela was the willing pawn, ready to accept defeat. As news of the attack spread, the world watched. International television channels broadcasted images of U.S. warships bathed in red alert lights. It was unclear if this was the beginning of a new conflict in the Caribbean. Military analysts quickly assessed Venezuela's production and reserve capabilities. They could not sustain launching hundreds of missiles for an extended period. Furthermore, their entire weapon system depended on external support. Caracas would be in serious trouble if the U.S. launched a full-scale counterattack. Donald Trump appeared in a brief national television address shortly thereafter. His voice was firm and clear. Venezuela crossed the red line tonight. We will not ignore any nation or individual that attacks Americans without consequence. The United States will respond immediately and forcefully. Once Trump made his decision, both Democratic and Republican senators recognized that the U.S. military would act without delay, and this action would be more than just defensive. In the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff convened an urgent meeting. Counter-response methods were devised. The Navy proposed precise strikes on the offshore missile launchers. The Air Force wanted to deploy B-2 Spirit bombers carrying GBU-57 bunker buster munitions to obliterate entire depots. The Marine Corps suggested using special forces to seize strategic armories before they could be destroyed. Trump's final conclusion: use all our best assets. We can neutralize this threat in one night. In Caracas, the Venezuelan leadership appeared satisfied. They believed their recent strike would force Washington to be cautious. State media declared it a victory in the Caribbean. But what was the reality? Their missiles barely harmed the U.S. Worse, they had provoked the world's leading military superpower. Perhaps they forgot that the U.S. had once used a shock and awe campaign to bring down Iraq in mere days. Perhaps they were unaware that the stealth technology of the F-35 and F-22 is capable of penetrating all their radar systems. They may have been too bold in believing a few missiles could make the U.S. fleet retreat. The entire world questioned China's motives when instigating Venezuela. What did the government want? The answer is simple. They wanted to start a new conflict with the U.S., to draw forces away, and to destabilize the U.S. backyard, thereby reducing pressure in Asia and the Pacific. However, Beijing overlooked a crucial factor. The U.S. has demonstrated multi-directional combat capabilities for decades. Its fleets in the Pacific, Mediterranean, and Caribbean can operate independently, yet coordinate within a synchronized surveillance system. Moreover, when Donald Trump gives the order, the entire colossal war machine begins to move. The Caribbean night was far from over. On the USS Reagan, A-18 pilots were ready for deployment. Virginia-class submarines moved silently beneath the ocean, their launch tubes prepared for the arrival of the first wave of Tomahawk missiles. The B-2 Spirit bombers in Florida took off from their base, forming a formation and heading west. This was no longer a warning. It was the beginning of a devastating strike. Observers had to admit, considering Venezuela's failed attack, that it wasn't enough to harm the U.S., but was sufficient to provoke a full-scale retaliation. Furthermore, the weaker party in this game would face the consequences. Donald Trump understood that no adversary of China should believe they could challenge the U.S. without repercussions. He wanted to send a message that the U.S. is not only the most powerful nation, but also one willing to act to protect that position. As Venezuelan missiles fell into the sea, they not only failed militarily but also set the stage for a terrifying firestorm to descend upon Caracas. In the future, Russia and China's extensive weapons stockpiles would be destroyed one by one. This would be the moment when Venezuela's radar and arsenal systems would explode in the atmosphere. This was where the U.S. would deploy its most advanced weaponry to obliterate a self-destructive foe. The fireballs descending into the Caribbean Sea were the result of Venezuela's failed attack, but their consequences were far-reaching. U.S. generals were focused on the man at the center of it all, Donald Trump. He made a swift decision. We will act immediately tonight. The U.S. must extinguish this threat from its root, and the world needs to see the outcome. Not just an order, but a declaration of war. On the Caribbean Sea, darkness enveloped the U.S. fleet. The pride of the U.S. Navy, the USS Reagan, transformed into a mobile command center. Hundreds of Super Hornets were lined up, their engines roaring with fiery exhaust. The ships moved closer. Nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines moved silently. The covers of the Tomahawk missile launch tubes were raised, and from Florida, the stealth B-2 Spirit bombers took flight, forming a formation and heading directly west. Everything was planned. The colossal war machine of the United States began to operate. The primary targets were the weapons depots in Venezuela, containing munitions, missiles, and aircraft supplied by Russia and China. These facilities had been monitored by U.S. intelligence for a long time. Satellite imagery and data from UAVs provided precise coordinates of each facility, gathered from embedded special agents. Escape was impossible. Waves of Tomahawk missiles launched from the Virginia-class submarines and the USS Porter destroyer flew low, hugging the terrain over Venezuelan jungles and valleys. The payload of each missile totaled nearly 500 kilonewtons, possessing enough power to destroy an entire factory complex in a single strike. Within minutes, the largest ammunition depot at the Maracay base erupted in flames. Chain explosions, with pillars of fire dozens of meters high, shattered the night. From tens of kilometers away, the residents of Caracas could see the sky turn crimson. Before they could comprehend it, a second wave of attacks hit Venezuela. From the USS Reagan Carrier Strike Group, FA-18s launched into the air, armed with anti-radar missiles and JDM-guided bombs. They split into formations and flew at low altitudes to remain undetected. As the aircraft approached their targets, each JDM separated from the fuselage and descended upon fuel depots and command centers. The explosions blossomed into infernos. Venezuelan air defenses activated, but they were immediately targeted by heat-seeking missiles, causing damage. The entire defense system collapsed within minutes. The cold Caribbean coast. Donald Trump monitored the live briefings from the White House Situation Room. The scene before him displayed each explosion clearly, and each enemy radar signal vanished. He nodded slightly and declared, "This is American technological might, and anyone who dares challenge us will fail." The same would happen elsewhere. Two B-2 Spirits flew at a different altitude, nearly 15 kilometers high, virtually invisible to radar. They carried GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, colossal weapons weighing nearly 14 tons, designed to destroy even the deepest underground facilities. Their target was an underground base in Valencia, believed to house a large number of ballistic missiles supplied by Russia. The bombs were dropped, penetrating dozens of meters of earth and concrete, before detonating with devastating force. The entire base, used for transport, the hangar roof collapsed, and the storage facility exploded with a sound like a natural earthquake. Venezuela's long-range attack capability was virtually annihilated in one blow. Fighter jets like the Su-30 and Su-35, still on their runways, were destroyed before they could take off. MQ-9 Reaper drones hovered above, transmitting precise imagery of the command centers. As they spotted targets on the runways, they launched AGM-114 Hellfire missiles with pinpoint accuracy. Aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars were completely destroyed. Many in Venezuela fled, unable to reach their cockpits in time. Firepower and electronic warfare were the twin pillars of U.S. strength. Before the attack, EA-18 Growler aircraft had entered the area, emitting jamming waves that crippled the enemy's entire data system. The result was that the Venezuelan military's communication and sensory systems were rendered useless and deaf. Units could not receive orders from command centers. Radars could not detect U.S. aircraft. The defense network was in chaos, and they had no idea how to respond. Then, the firestorm descended, causing panic among Venezuelan soldiers. They had never witnessed such a large-scale and precise attack. Many fled while others were buried in the explosions of destroyed munitions depots. Screams and continuous explosions created a scene of horrific chaos. CNN, BBC, and Reuters all broadcasted live satellite imagery of the massive fires in Venezuela. Military experts described it as one of the most effective and precise air campaigns in world history, second only to the shock and awe campaign. U.S. military technology had proven itself invincible. What about the actions of Russia and China? Moscow was furious but unable to send rapid aid. The Russian military was already stretched thin on multiple fronts, lacking sufficient resources to assist. Meanwhile, Beijing grew even angrier as the weapons they supplied were immediately destroyed. However, a direct confrontation with the U.S. in their Caribbean backyard would be akin to suicide. Donald Trump viewed this campaign as retaliation, but also as a strategic message. He wanted to demonstrate that the U.S. was not just defensive, but also willing to directly attack any nation that dared to use hostile military assets as tools. He wanted to signal to Beijing, "Do not think you can use drugs or weak allies to undermine the U.S. The consequences will be far worse than anyone anticipates." The structure of the question is clear. Listeners, if the U.S. hadn't taken decisive action, how many more drug caches and weapons facilities would have been established in South America? If Donald Trump hadn't made a swift decision, could the American people have been protected from such insidious plots? Furthermore, who would have been capable of preventing disaster if the U.S. military hadn't employed advanced technology? The dawn broke over Caracas, different from any other morning in Venezuela's history. Thick black smoke blanketed the sky, and flames still rose from the destroyed weapons depots. Continuous explosions shook the ground, and thousands of Venezuelan soldiers had perished during the night, a night that their nation's history would forever remember. Donald Trump appeared once more, a testament to the folly of daring to challenge the U.S. This time, his voice was deeper, but still full of power. Our actions have led to a clear result. Any force that uses allies to provoke the United States will face the same outcome. The U.S. possesses the latest weapon technology, and we will not hesitate to use it to protect our people. Those words resonated with both China and Venezuela, the perpetrators of the drug conspiracy who believed it could weaken the U.S. from within society. Russia and other countries continuing to export weapons to fuel instability. And for the world, it was a declaration that the U.S. remains the last pillar of global order, meaning the U.S. had not only prevented threats, but proactively attacked and eradicated all dangerous seeds at their root. Venezuela was on the brink of collapse. Although China was furious, they were forced to remain silent. Russia suffered a blow as its weapon depots were destroyed, and the U.S., under Donald Trump's decisive leadership, once again demonstrated its might. However, the questions remained. How would the world react to this bombardment? How would they adapt? Would China continue to advance or retreat in the face of U.S. power? Would Russia dare to continue its support or withdraw to avoid further defeat? Furthermore, crucially, would this campaign be enough to deter all future plans, or was it merely the beginning of a more dangerous spiral? The dawn in Caracas was unlike any other in Venezuela's history. Thick black smoke covered the sky, and flames still erupted from destroyed weapons depots, while unceasing explosions echoed throughout the capital. Surviving soldiers looked at each other in despair. In just one night, their entire military system had been shattered. Fighter jets like the Su-30 and Su-35 lay mangled on the tarmac. The Maracay ammunition depot continued to burn until noon. The underground base in Valencia, once considered an impregnable fortress, was now merely a useless crater. Thousands of soldiers were missing or dead. Venezuela's entire offensive capability had been eliminated. Global media outlets like CNN, BBC, and Reuters reported this as an attack that was precise, swift, and effective, paralyzing Venezuela within hours. Major newspapers asked, "Are there any other nations in the world capable of inflicting such damage?" The answer was clear. In Beijing, the atmosphere was tense. The weapons they supplied to Venezuela were paraded on global television. China was known worldwide as being behind the drug plot and Venezuela's recklessness. However, the official response from Beijing was merely muted statements criticizing the U.S.'s unilateral actions. Beyond a veiled threat, there was only bitter silence and no military action. Why did China remain silent? Because they understood the balance of power too clearly. China would have to deploy its navy halfway across the globe to intervene directly in the Caribbean. However, even then, their fleet could not compare to the overwhelming might of the U.S., even if they reached their objective. Furthermore, if they chose to go through the Pacific, they would immediately encounter the 7th Fleet with U.S. bases in Guam, Okinawa, and Hawaii, which would be suicidal. Therefore, they were forced to accept the failure of their now globally recognized strategy. Russia was no different. The Kremlin condemned the U.S., but beyond public statements, was incapable of doing anything. Other factors were weakening Russia's economy. Their weapons stockpiles were insufficient to aid Venezuela, and their military resources were inadequate. The U.S. had swiftly destroyed their transport. International reputation took another heavy blow. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's public appearances became more frequent. Every word he spoke was firm. "We will never allow Beijing, Moscow, or Washington to influence the lives of Americans. We guarantee that everyone in the U.S. is safe. Their lives are being impacted by Caracas. The U.S. has proven one thing tonight. We will use the latest technology to protect freedom and the future." This was not just a military victory, but also a political and spiritual one. Consider the reality: a country like Venezuela, with the support of Russia and China, was brought to its knees in mere hours. What would happen if China dared to engage in direct combat with the U.S.? Would they dare to change course? Billions of dollars invested, millions of soldiers, and the involvement of the entire world in a conflict where the outcome was already clear? Today, silence may be the answer. U.S. allies around the globe watched with renewed confidence. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and NATO were well aware that Donald Trump not only made declarations but was prepared to act. He was ready to defend allies using ultimate military power, and this message resonated far beyond any diplomatic promise. Military analysts raised many questions. How could the U.S. execute such precise operations? Because they possess the world's leading intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, and ISR systems. Every submarine, satellite, and UAV is a link in a vast network. The U.S. can reconstruct an entire map with just a minor signal or an image. The enemy's military capabilities are identified, and every strike is accurate to the meter when it's time to act. This is a power no other nation can match. Meanwhile, the people of Venezuela felt despair and confusion. Countless individuals fled seeking shelter. Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients, and smoke and fire engulfed the entire city. The Caracas government was almost incapable of functioning. They had gambled with their nation's future and lost disastrously. In just one night, thousands of families lost sons, fathers, and husbands. Those tears were the price paid for a wrong choice. However, the story didn't end in Caracas. It continued in Washington, where strategists saw this as a turning point. By conducting direct strikes and destroying weapons depots supplied by Russia and China, the U.S. sent a powerful message. Any nation that aligns with Beijing or Moscow will face swift consequences, as no area is safe and there are no second chances. After years of tension related to foreign-supplied drugs, there was finally a clear outcome. The production network was destroyed, weapons depots were obliterated, and the architects of the plot were forced to bow their heads. Only a strong leader like Donald Trump could achieve this. The question arises for the listener. How many more Americans would have fallen victim to drugs without such decisive decisions? Without these deterrent strikes, how many more nations would have been drawn into this dangerous spiral? Traveling from Beijing and without the U.S., would anyone have been capable of preventing the spread of a drug and weapons empire? Back in Beijing, leaders sat for hours in their briefing rooms, but in the end, they could only offer silence. Not because they didn't want to respond, but because they knew any more reckless action would only lead to more severe consequences. Moreover, that silence was the clearest evidence of America's victory. Donald Trump's speech concluded with a concise message. Never underestimate the United States. Beyond military strength, we possess other strengths, but also an iron will to protect everyone, and those who conspire to sow trouble, sow destruction. As for Venezuela, remember this lesson. Those words echoed around the world. The American people felt reassured, their allies were strengthened, and their enemies fled, assured by their government. This final segment not only concluded a military battle, but also ushered in a new era, where the U.S. proved it remains the superpower. Although China was angry, they had to remain silent. Russia was bitter but powerless. Once again, the U.S. reaffirmed its position as an unchallengeable and unparalleled global power. Thank you for watching our complete analysis of the war situation. For those who enjoy geopolitical truths and what's truly happening on the global battlefield, this is Military. Remember to subscribe to the channel.